All right, welcome to Kael's podcast. Let's dig in. You know the story. David, the kid shepherd Goliath, the big scary giant.
Yep. Sling, stone, boom, giant down.
Victory. It's
Yeah.
like the ultimate underdog story. It pops up everywhere.
Oh, totally. Business, sports, playground arguments, David versus Goliath is just baked into our culture. It's a story that really sticks.
Exactly. But what if, and just hear me out, what if the story we all know isn't quite the whole picture? What if there's let's say, a slight wrinkle in the official version, maybe even in the Bible itself?
A potential plot twist, you might say?
Prepare yourselves, folks.
Yeah, for this little exploration, we're diving into some pretty interesting texts. We've got 1 Samuel 17, that's the classic account everyone knows.
Right, the main event.
But then we also have these other verses like 2 Samuel 21.19 and 1 Chronicles 20.5 that kind of make you scratch your head.
Intriguing.
And we'll look at some older manuscripts too. You know, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, plus what scholars have been saying about all this for ages.
So our mission today is basically to wade into this textual tangle, see if the famous David and Goliath story has maybe got a few inconsistencies, and figure out what that might actually mean. Ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, first up, the story we all learned, the blockbuster version.
Right. 1 Samuel 17, you've got the scene, Israelites versus Philistines, armies staring each other down. And then there's Goliath.
The giant, huge guy. Terrifying.
Absolutely. And he's out there every day, trash-talking, daring anyone from Israel to fight him one-on-one.
And the Israelite army, total panic mode, right? For like 40 days. Even King Saul's hiding.
Pretty much. They're all terrified. Saul, who's supposed to be this big, impressive king, is just as scared as everyone else.
And then, cue the entrance music.
Yeah.
In walks David, the shepherd boy.
Yeah, basically the kid brother sent to deliver lunch. Not exactly your seasoned warrior.
Definitely not. He's, like, fresh off the pasture.
Yeah.
More used to dealing with sheep than 9-foot giants.
True. But he's got this incredible confidence, not in himself necessarily, but in God. He basically says, you know, the same God who helped me fight off lions and bears will help me take down this Philistine.
That famous line from 1 Samuel 17.37. Bold move for a kid with a sling.
Extremely bold. And we all know how it ends, or how we think it ends.
Sling, stone, thwack, Goliath hits the dirt.
David's an instant hero, national celebrity, future king material right there. It's the foundation of his legend.
Perfect story. Faith, courage, impossible odds overcome. Inspiring stuff.
Absolutely. It's powerful, sets up his whole trajectory. A narrative triumph.
Beaut. And there's always a but when we do these deep dives, isn't there?
Usually, yeah.
Turns out, some very smart people reading this very chapter, 1 Samuel 17, have noticed a few, well, oddities. Things that don't quite line up.
Like what?
Well, for starters, think back just one chapter to 1 Samuel 16. Who is David in that chapter?
He's already in Saul's court, right?
Yeah.
Playing the harp for him. And he's Saul's armor bearer.
Exactly. Saul knows him. He's part of the inner circle, practically. Soothing the king's moods, carrying his weapons, they're acquainted.
Okay.
Then, fast forward to the end of chapter 17, after David has just done the impossible and defeated Goliath. What does Saul ask his commander, Abner?
Oh, doesn't he say something like, whose son is this kid?
Bingo. Whose son is this youth? It's like,
Yeah.
Wait, what? Didn't you just have this same kid playing music for you and carrying your armor like yesterday? Feels like a major continuity glitch.
Yeah, that is pretty jarring. It's like David gets introduced twice.
And speaking of introductions, there's this thing scholars point out called a doublet.
Ah, yes, like two slightly different versions of a story appearing close together. It often signals different sources being woven together.
Right, so in 1 Samuel 17, around verse 12, the story suddenly hits pause and reintroduces David's family, his dad Jesse, his brothers, the whole shepherd thing.
Stuff we kind of already knew from chapter 16 or earlier parts of 17.
Exactly. It's like the narrative suddenly goes, oh wait, let me tell you about this new character, David, even though he's already the main character. A bit redundant, you know.
It does feel like a reset mid-story.
And it's not just the plot points. The whole feel of chapter 17 is different, isn't it?
It really is. The style changes. Chapter 16 is more straightforward prose. But chapter 17, it's much more dramatic, almost like a performance piece.
Yeah, big speeches from Goliath, vivid battle descriptions.
Right. Robert Alter called it the most stylized of all the David stories. It feels almost like a standalone epic poem that got inserted. David M. Gunn also talked about later editors possibly adding layers, embellishing it.
So it's like maybe chapter 17 wasn't originally part of the same narrative flow. Maybe it was a separate, more legendary story that got stitched in.
That's definitely a possibility scholars consider. The internal seams are showing a bit, perhaps.
Okay, so we've got some weirdness within the main David and Goliath chapter itself. But hold on, because things are about to get even more complicated. Let's talk about Elhanan.
Elhanan, yes. This is where the plot really thickens. You're reading along in the Bible, you get past the David stories, and then you hit 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 19.
What's hiding there?
Just this little line. And there was again war with the Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, the son of Jair-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite.
Whoa, wait, say that again? Elhanan slew Goliath.
That's what it says. Elhanan, son of Jair-Oregim from Bethlehem, slew Goliath the Gittite.
But where's David? Where's the sling? Where's the underdog triumph? It just says Elhanan did it.
No David mentioned in that verse at all. Just Elhanan. It's a pretty direct contradiction to 1 Samuel 17.
Okay, my head hurts a little. Is this a typo?
Yeah.
Did someone mess up? How can both be true?
Well, that's the puzzle, and it gets even more interesting when you look at a parallel passage in another book, 1 Chronicles.
Chronicles, that came later, right? Kind of retells some of the earlier history.
Exactly. And look what 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5 says about a similar battle. And there was again war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jair, struck down Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite.
Ah, okay, slight difference there. Lami, the brother of Goliath, not Goliath himself.
Precisely. A very convenient adjustment, wouldn't you say?
Convenient is one word for it. So Chronicles fixes the problem. David gets Goliath, Elhanan gets the less famous brother, Lami. Everyone's happy.
Well, many scholars see this change in Chronicles as a deliberate editorial move, a theological correction, if you will. Meaning the chronicler, writing later and really wanting to emphasize David's unique greatness and the legitimacy of his dynasty, might have found the 2 Samuel verse problematic. Elhanan killing the Goliath. That kind of steps on David's toes.
So they tweaked it, changed Goliath to Goliath's brother to keep David's record clean as the one and only giant slayer.
That's the prevailing theory. Chronicles often smooths out rough edges or inconsistencies found in Samuel and Kings, especially when it comes to David and Solomon. It boosts the monarchy's image.
And this Lami guy, where did that name even come from?
That's also fascinating. The name Lami looks very similar to the last part of Elhanan's father's name in 2 Samuel, Jair-Oregim, and also sounds like part of the Hebrew word for Bethlehemite, Beit Halachmi.
So, it might not even be a real name. It could be derived from the description of Elhanan himself.
It's quite possible. It looks like a scribal attempt to make sense of the 2 conflicting accounts, keep Elhanan in the story, but give the main prize, Goliath, back to David by inventing a brother based on the existing text about Elhanan. Pretty clever, really.
Clever and maybe a little bit sneaky. Okay, so the biblical text itself seems to contain these competing versions. What about those manuscripts you mentioned earlier, the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff?
Right. The manuscript evidence adds another layer. Some fragments of 2 Samuel found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are very ancient copies, actually seem to support the original reading where Elhanan kills Goliath, not his brother.
Wow. So older evidence points towards the Elhanan version being more widespread, maybe?
It certainly suggests that version was known and circulated early on. And then there's the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament.
What about it?
Well, the Septuagint's version of 1 Samuel 17, the main David and Goliath chapter, is actually much shorter than the standard Hebrew version, the Masoretic text we usually read. It leaves out some key parts, including that whole reintroduction of David and Saul asking who he is.
So the Greek version is less contradictory internally.
In some ways, yes. It's smoother, but it's also missing chunks of the story we consider standard. These variations across ancient manuscripts strongly suggest that the story, especially 1 Samuel 17, wasn't set in stone from the beginning. It likely evolved, compiled from different sources, edited over time.
It wasn't just dictated perfectly once and then copied flawlessly forever. It was a bit more organic, messy.
Exactly. And we need to remember the role of ancient scribes. They weren't just photocopiers. They saw themselves as preserving sacred tradition and meaning. If that meant smoothing out a contradiction or adapting a story to highlight a theological point they felt was crucial, they might do it.
So for them, theological truth might have sometimes outweighed literal historical accuracy. It wasn't deception, but interpretation.
That's a good way to put it. They were constructing meaning, ensuring the text conveyed what they believed were the essential truths about God and Israel's history. It's a different mindset than modern historical reporting.
Okay, that makes sense. So why might they have done this? Why potentially take this heroic deed from Elhanan and give it to David? What was the payoff?
Well, think about what David represented. He wasn't just a king. He was the king, the founder of the dynasty, the standard against which others were measured.
The ideal. God's chosen one.
Precisely. And in the ancient world, it was pretty common practice to attribute major victories or accomplishments to the main ruler or founding hero, even if others actually did the work. Think Egyptian pharaohs claiming victory in battles fought by their general.
Right, it adds to their legitimacy, their mystique, their power. Makes them look bigger than life.
Exactly. Scholars like Robert Gordon and Joel Baden suggest this is likely what happened here. Attributing the Goliath victory to David, Israel's founding king, served a powerful purpose. It cemented his image as the ultimate warrior, blessed by God, capable of overcoming any obstacle. It was great PR for the monarchy.
So, the story becomes a symbol. David defeating the giant symbolizes Israel under God's chosen king defeating its enemies.
That's a big part of it. Finkelstein and Silberman argue in their book David and Solomon that the grand biblical descriptions of David's kingdom might reflect theological ideals as much as, or even more than, precise historical or archaeological reality. The Goliath story fits perfectly into this. It's a foundational myth, a national symbol of divinely ordained triumph.
Less about, did David kill this specific giant on this specific day? And more about, David is the kind of leader who can defeat giants.
You got it. It establishes his archetype. As Raymond Person puts it, the editors were constructing a sacred memory, not a journalistic one. They were shaping how David would be remembered for generations.
History as theology, or theology shaping history. Fascinating.
And it's important to stress, this isn't some fringe idea. It reflects a broad consensus among critical biblical scholars who study the text's development. Think of the documentary hypothesis, the idea that the Hebrew Bible is woven from multiple older sources. Contradictions like the Elhanan David one are seen as clues pointing to these different origins and editorial layers.
So the inconsistencies aren't flaws to be ignored, they're actually data points, clues to how the text was put together.
Exactly. They open a window into the Bible's complex history. It doesn't necessarily undermine faith. For many, it reveals a richer, more human, yet still divinely inspired text. It shows people wrestling with God and their history over centuries.
Okay, deep breath. We've got the classic story, the internal wobbles, the Elhanan bombshell, the Chronicles correction, the manuscript evidence, the theories about why. So the big question now is, what do we do with this? If David maybe didn't kill Goliath, does the whole story fall apart? Does it matter?
That really is the crucial question, isn't it? And I don't think it has to dismantle anything. For some people, finding out the story might be more complex, can be challenging to their faith, absolutely.
Yeah, if you were raised thinking it happened exactly one way.
Right. But for others, seeing the Bible as this layered text full of tensions and different perspectives developed over time, well, that can actually be quite affirming.
How so?
It makes the Bible feel more alive, more dynamic. Not just a flat instruction manual dropped from the sky, but a record of real people engaging with God, interpreting their history, writing and rewriting their sacred stories. It shows the human fingerprints alongside the divine inspiration.
Like reading someone's journal that's been added to over generations, maybe? Showing how understanding evolved.
That's a great analogy. And David's importance doesn't suddenly vanish if Elhanan struck the blow. David is still David the shepherd, the musician, the king, the poet, the sinner, the man after God's own heart. His significance rests on his entire complex story and relationship with God, not just this one disputed battle.
So the meaning of the story can still hold, even if the historical specifics are debated. The idea of courage, faith against odds, that still resonates.
Absolutely. The giant can be literal, historical, metaphorical. It represents the overwhelming challenge. The story, whether starring David or Elhanan originally, inspires courage and faith in the face of that. That impact is real, regardless of the precise historical footnote.
Maybe the point isn't who held the sling, but the faith that powered it. The willingness to step up when everyone else was afraid.
I think that's a powerful way to look at it. Perhaps the enduring message invites us to wrestle with the text, with its complexities and ambiguities, rather than demanding simple, final answers. Faith often grows in the wrestling, in the questioning, not just in the easy acceptance.
So Goliath keeps showing up, doesn't he? Maybe not as a literal giant, but as, the huge challenges we face personally or as a society. Injustice, fear, division.
All sorts of modern Goliaths. And maybe, like Saul's army, we sometimes forget the tools. We actually have the metaphorical slingshots to face them.
And David. Maybe he's still in the story too. Not just as the historical king, but as that spark of unexpected courage, or maybe even as the question itself, prompting us to look closer, like Elhanan hiding in the footnotes.
The story isn't finished. The sling keeps swinging, in a way. The scroll keeps unfolding as we keep reading and interpreting.
So maybe the real question isn't just who killed Goliath. Maybe it's what giant are we facing, and what story are we writing now? Lots to think about there.
Always is.
Okay, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious.